Maybe we can get started. It's a little after 12. So I wanted to welcome people to the Duke Center on Addiction and Behavior Change. I'm Ed Levin, director of the CABC. And before we get into today's talk, which I'm really looking forward to, I just wanted to give you a heads up about the upcoming events. The one that's coming up on November 10th is the TK Lee lecture. TK Lee was the director of National Institute on Alcoholism and Alcohol Abuse for a long time, and also it was a professor at Indiana University, and then came to Duke and was a kind of towards the end of his career helped foster drug abuse research here. And so he endowed, unfortunately he passed away, but he endowed a TK Lee lecture series. And that's going to be November 10th as a part of the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences Grand Round series. There's a link that's going to be posted in the chat, and also I'm going to send it out to the listserv. It's going to be in person and via Zoom. And Ayana Jordan from New York University is going to be speaking about her work with inequities in addiction treatment. And then the next CABC seminar, together with the Center for Study of Adolescent Risk and Resilience, is going to be November 17th, and Meredith Adicott from Wake Forest University, she used to be here at Duke, is going to talk about her work with smoking and smoking cessation. And then we're going to finish up December 1st with Elizabeth Lippert, who used to be at UNC, but now is University of Texas, talk about her research with adolescent risk. I'm still putting together the seminar series for the spring. If you have any suggestions, if you'd like to give a talk or you have a suggestion, please email me at levin@duke.edu. So now it's my privilege and honor to introduce Dr. Amir Rezvani, who's a professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences here at Duke University, long-term collaborator and world's expert in addiction in general, and specifically alcohol and animal models of alcoholism and nicotine and other drugs as well. But he also has been doing a lot of teaching in his 23 years here at Duke, and is currently teaching undergraduates, freshmen, about addiction and brain, individual, and society. So he's going to talk to us today about his teaching methods in terms of teaching undergraduates about drug addiction. Amir?
Hello. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for attending, and Ed, thank you so much for your inviting me and for the nice introduction. So I've been teaching this course about 22 years at Duke, and then the main objectives of the course is help a student to develop a scientific, clinical, and social perspectives on addiction and substance abuse. The course is mostly debate and discussion, and from the very beginning, I tell students we are a family. And then you have to feel absolutely comfortable to share your stories about addiction, substance abuse, your family, your neighbors, your friends. And then I assure them that, it's totally confidential, and they accept that. And that helps a lot other students when they share their stories. So that's one of the things that I emphasize. And how we get to our goals. These are the things that we are covered actually. Define addiction, dependence, abuse, misuse, tolerance, cross-tolerance, withdrawal, and addiction terminology, and as well as comorbidity also. We cover comorbidity as well. And then after these terminologies, we discuss the brain reward pathway in relation to addiction. And then, for example, what is the common denominator between sex, getting food, and getting good grades? And so we discussed that, and then I'll tell you a little bit later. And then pharmacology, neuropharmacology of addiction, particularly alcohol misuse and alcoholism. We talk a lot about alcohol because, as you all know, alcohol has been around for thousands of years, almost in every culture. And then so we know more about alcohol than other drugs. And a lot of things that we know about alcohol also can be expanded to other drugs. So we talk about alcohol a lot. And then we talked about the withdrawal symptoms associated with alcohol and other drugs, comparing, for example, withdrawal of alcohol versus heroin. And then say, is this true that one can die from alcohol withdrawal? And then we discussed that, and then we discussed the genetics aspect of addiction, especially alcoholism, and then moderate drinking, because a lot of people say, well, it's okay to if I drink in moderation, and then we discuss that, and we talk about risk and benefits. We are totally open about every aspect that we talk. So like some people say it's good, some people say it has risk. So we try to talk about both risk and benefits associated with moderate drinking. And then since we have most of my students are women, we cover fetal alcohol syndrome disorder. And then previous years, actually, I was able to bring a family with their child who had fetal alcohol syndrome disorder in the class, and they talk about it, talk about the kid and so on. But because of the pandemic, this year I was not able to invite them, unfortunately. That was very, very effective when students saw people with fetal alcohol syndrome disorder. And then we discussed the neuropharmacology of comorbidity, because as you know, most drug addicts have other mental disorders. And then we talked about the existing pharmacotherapy for addiction. And we discussed the scientific basis behind each approach, like naltrexone and so on. And finally, students are charged with a task to improve their community regarding substance abuse disorder and addiction through self-designed practical projects. I'll tell you just a second. Okay, so what are the sources that we use? The textbook that we use is BUZZ. The authors are distinguished professors here at Duke, Dr. Scott Swartzwelder and Cindy Kuhn. And then we have another book that we read is written by the name of the book is Terry's Life and Death from Alcoholism. And the students have to read that book, and we have one session then discuss the book. And also we have several related scientific articles that I assign, they read, and then we discuss it. We have guest speakers from Duke and outside. For example, from Duke, Scott came to the class and talked about the book and about the different chapters. And I have the next week, I have Dr. Katie Healy is coming to talk about the stimulants. And yesterday we had Justin Sharp talk about health and well-being at Duke. He's the associate director of that institute. And also one of the most effective things that we do, we're inviting residents from TROSA, Triangle Residential Option for Substance Abusers, and they come to the class and share their stories. And this is extremely, extremely effective for students to see someone who had addiction for a long time, and now he's or she's doing well. The students, we have several projects. First of all, they have to be attentive. They come to the class, active participation, debate, and discussion. And then they have to do, each student has to do one individual project. This individual project can be anything that can portray any aspect of addiction, can be painting, can be a piece of music, can be games, can anything. Can they, they're open to do a project to present any aspects of addiction, and they have to present it to the class at the very end. And all this is individual project. And we have a group project, 2 or 3 students get together, and they and come up with a project, and that project is a community project. So they have to select a community and to see how can they improve their lives if they have substance abuse or addiction. The project has to be the way that if you want to implement it, we should be able to implement it, but we are not going to do. But the goal is the students to learn how to improve their communities. And the reading assignment, as I said, also, and they have to write their own reflection on guest speakers when they come here. So attendance 10 points, active participation in debate and discussion 15 points, individual project 25 points, abstinence project 25 points, and group project 25 points. Let me tell you a little bit about the abstinence project. The goal of this project is students get a sense how difficult it is if you are really addicted to quit. Because a lot of people say, well, why don't you quit? It's not that easy. If you're really addicted to a drug, it's not that easy. So to really understand, I asked them, to stay away, abstain from something that you think you're addicted to. Of course, not addiction like a drug, but if you are really have to have it, like coffee, rice, eating rice, eating cookies, TikTok, anything that you think you are really have to have it. They have to abstain from that for 40 consecutive days. And they have to write their diary every other day or every day, if they relapse, their feelings, their craving. And at the end, they have to go over their diary and write a 2-page, 3-page reflection about that. And that project is very, very effective. And students at the beginning, of course, they don't like it. I remember at one time, after 1 week, I asked the students, how is your abstinence project going on? And some of them said, Dr. Rezvani, we hate you. And I said, well, that's a good sign. It seems that it's working. So they are really involved in everything. It's not just the lecture. That's why I think the students like it. And then to show the importance and the magnitude of addiction in our society, I gave them some statistics. This is the actual cause of death in the US, roughly. Tobacco, about 43,000 a year, alcohol, 80,000, opioid, about 70,000 overdose. And I give them some other statistics to compare, like for heart disease is 600,000, for cancer 600,000, and firearms 35,000. And if you look at these numbers, you see how, for example, tobacco is very, very severe addiction. And then we go from there to history of alcoholism. Alcohol, as you know, alcohol has been around for thousands of years. This is a picture shows that this goes back actually to about 4,000 years ago. This guy was drunk, intoxicated, and is carried out from the party for drinking too much wine in Egypt. And then so it has been around for thousands of years. And then we talked about the history of alcoholism in this country. We start from the first distillery, which was opened on Staten Island in New York in 1640. People were drinking 2.5 times of alcohol than now. And then we talk about the Washington temperance movement, and then prohibition and its consequences. And then the first alcohol center was founded in Yale University before NIH, actually, which is very interesting. And then National Council on Alcoholism in 1944. Still NIAAA doesn't exist. And then the biggest step was in 1987 that American Medical Association addressed alcoholism as a disease. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then in 1971, National Institute of Alcoholism and Alcohol Abuse was founded in NIH. And then in the 1970s, 80s, genetic of alcoholism was addressed. And since then, we have a lot of data, information that there is a genetic predisposition for some people. And then eventually in 1994, 2 drugs, one naltrexone, and 2006, another drug, acamprosate, were approved by FDA. So we came from the time that people didn't think alcoholism is a disease to the point that yes, there is a disease, and then there are some treatments as well. And then I'll talk about alcoholism, all aspects of alcoholism, absorption, digestion, and blood-brain barrier, and all of that, and blood alcohol concentration. What does it mean? We talk about all of that, and also I show them that the blood alcohol concentration can be different in the men and women versus women, based because there's a difference in physio and in absorption and digestion in both sexes. And then what factor do affect your blood alcohol concentration? Students has to know that because most students drink alcohol, especially the first few years in college. About, I think 70% or 75% of students drink alcohol. So they have to know what factor can affect their blood alcohol concentration. So of course, gender, smaller blood alcohol metabolism in the stomach in women, we talk about that. Talk about genetic, we talk about the body size, we talk about the food in the stomach. I recommend them, if you are going to a party this weekend, make sure to have some food, especially fatty food in your stomach. And we talk about the pattern of drinking, how fast you drink, how much do you drink, what kind of alcohol do you drink, is beer or liquor. And then also we definitely talk about medications and alcohol, and that if you are going to drink, if you are taking any medication, you have to stay from alcohol, because medication might have an effect on alcohol, or alcohol might have an effect on metabolism of your medicine. So we talk about that too. And then this is the blood alcohol concentration in empty stomach versus stomach with food. All right, and then we turn into brain, and then talk about the anatomy of the brain. Of course, not in details, but talk about the different lobes and their functions, and then the effect of alcohol on every lobe. And the most, we talked about the effect of alcohol. So the most effect of alcohol that has never been heard of is the OOPS response, so-called OOPS response. That if you are drinking too much, even at the alcohol concentration of 0.04, you might lose your OOPS response and get into, for example, in car accident or so on. And then and alcohol and loss of behavioral control. We talked about the role of the frontal cortex and decision making, and the judgment. And we talk a lot about the frontal lobe, and it's important in our daily life. And then and behavioral impairment is more pronounced when blood alcohol is rising than when it is falling. So I will talk about the functional tolerance, metabolic tolerance, and so on. And then students share their stories. Actually, they tell, yes, when I was a party, at the very first 2 hours, I was feeling that, and after that, I was kind of sleepy. So we share their stories about that too. And this again talk about this next, and then we talked about the level of blood alcohol concentration on different parts of the brain. For example, frontal lobe, which is it seems that the more sensitive, even at 0.01. 0.08 is the legal limit, less than 0.08, but even at 0.01, it might have an effect. So it depends on the individual. And then we talked about the importance of a frontal lobe in decision making and judgment by showing this amazing story of Finis Gage. As you know, Finis Gage frontal lobe was damaged by a rod which was thrown to his head. Fortunately, he survived, but he was not the same as before. His judgment, his decision making was totally different. From that point, scientists concentrated a lot of research on understanding the frontal lobe in decision making and judgment. So we emphasize on that. And then and the parietal lobe, home of sensation, also is sensitive at 0.1 to 0.3, and then occipital lobe 0.2, 0.3, and cerebellum, which is very important in breathing and so on, as 0.15 to 0.3. And recently I saw an article and we talked about that cerebellum is also involved in cognition. So might have alcohol might have an effect on that too, and also breathing. And then blood alcohol concentration and behavioral impairment. We talk about the different concentration of alcohol in different behaviors. For example, 0.05 is behavioral disinhibition, feeling warmth, and so on. And then, for example, at 0.1, slurring speech, loss of fine motor control. At 0.2, staggering gait. 0.3, stuporous. 0.4, comatose, irregular breathing. And at 0.5, death possible. So as the blood alcohol concentration goes up, the effect become more damaging. And then talk about because all students are adolescents, so we talked about the adolescent and substance abuse. The danger of using drugs at that age, if they use alcohol, they might use other drugs. But we have talked about the brain adaptation, tolerance, may cause developmental delay, short-term memory, reasoning, and problem solving. So we talk about all of these, the effect of alcohol if they during adolescence. And then we emphasize that the students, I say, your brain, you have been admitted to Duke University and you are very clever, you are one of the best, but your brain is still developing. So, and they continue to develop until the 20s, up to maybe 25. And then, and the adolescent brain is different from the adult brain. We emphasize that, we talk about that, and we say, we know that your brain as an adolescent is less resilient to alcohol and other drugs, and they're less sensitive to the negative effect of alcohol and more sensitive to the positive effect of alcohol, the dopamine system and reward. And we'll talk about that later in the course. And also we talk about the age-related difference in pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic effects. Is the blood alcohol concentration with the same amount of alcohol is not the same in a 20-year-old versus like a 40 or 50 or 60. So we talk about that. And then what are the common risk factors for adolescents? We talk about that, and the students really can associate the early first use of drug, friends, peer pressure, family histories, childhood abuse. For family stories, I ask a student to share their stories, and some of them share their stories, and they say, "Yeah, in our family, yes, my grandfather and my uncle and my dad, they are drinking and so on." And child abuse or trauma and academic failure, alienation, boredom, all of these contribute to drinking in adolescence. Oh, blackout. This is a great topic. We talk about this the whole session. First of all, I asked them, to share your stories. I share my own stories with them first, and then they feel very comfortable. And some of them say, "Yeah, well, I thought actually 2 weeks ago I had a blackout, or I had a brownout," and we talked about that, and we talked about the consequences. You share their stories, and then we go through the mechanism. What happens? What does it mean by blackouts? Why you don't have memory? So we talk about the mechanism of blackout, how the transfer of short-term memory to long-term memory is disrupted for a period of time, and then where we talk about the level of alcohol, blood alcohol concentration in memory. From 0.08, it starts a mild explicit memory impairment up to complete blackout or en bloc blackouts. And then what can happen during blackout? Actually, based on the paper that was written in 2002, Aaron White and Scott paper, they showed that 33% report insult someone, 27% spend money, 25% sexual activity, 16% argument or fight, and so on. And this is really eye-opening for a student, especially when we talk about the insult someone or sexual activity, especially for girls in the class, is very, very important to know that, and we emphasize that. And I give them this example. This is a classic example. This guy, Shane Mahmood, had a blackout, and during the blackout, someone pierced a ring in his lower lip. And when he woke up in the morning, he saw it in the mirror. He says, I don't remember. I didn't feel it. So he doesn't remember. He said he didn't remember anything except he was drinking beer and some other drugs. And after that, he didn't remember anything. And we talked about what factors contribute to blackouts. Okay. Drinking too much, drinking mixed drugs, and then also drinking too fast. And then we talk about that. And then the other ethical question that we discuss, okay, if you have blackouts and do something absolutely wrong, are you responsible or not? What is the ethical point of that? So does blackout remove mens rea? And we discuss that, we debate that, and then I give them some examples. And then because people say, I didn't mean it, I don't remember it, but the thing has been done. So what is the ethical point of that? What should be done? And then we discuss different ideas, because some people are still out there say, you started your drinking or drug taking voluntarily. No one put an arm in your face to do so. You did it voluntarily. Then, thus, you should be able to quit by force of will. So we talked about the free will versus not free will. We talk about that. We discuss that. We debate it, and we get different ideas. And then that takes us to the concept of hijacked brain, which has been around for 30 years. Some people say when you drink too much or you're become addicted, your brain is hijacked. And when it's like any hijacked, you don't have any control. And then that takes us to the reward system in the brain. I showed them this ad from the tobacco companies. Reward yourself. Which is true, you're rewarding yourself, but the consequences. What do they mean by rewarding yourself? And then we go to the reward pathway in the brain, VTAs, substantia nigra and frontal cortex, and dopamine release, and this is a cartoon of human brain, and then rat brain here, again, the ventral tegmental area, nuclear accumbens, and the frontal cortex. We talk about that, and we talk about the effect of different drugs on dopamine release and other neurotransmitters being involved in the reward, and like endorphin and so on. And then I show them this beautiful rat, this system that is set up that we use for understanding the neurobiology of addiction, and test different drugs if they are addictive or not, even in rats. And then how can we reduce so-called craving in rats by through this system? So I explained this to them, and then addiction does not discriminate. We talked about that. Anyone can become addicted if they are not careful. So addiction doesn't discriminate. I presented them with some very famous people in the world, Sigmund Freud, addicted to cocaine, and Ernest Hemingway, Nobel Prize winner, and then this guy, and then Whitney Houston, magnificent voice, she killed herself, and then this guy, and then the First Lady. The First Lady had everything that we can think of. I mean, everything. She was the First Lady of America, but still she was addicted to alcohol. And then this guy, lady, and then Philip Seymour Hoffman died at 46, addiction, and Robin Williams, extremely talented artist, killed himself, and they're homeless. So it can happen to everyone. And we discussed that. And then students share their stories if they have alcoholism in their family and so on. And then through the course, we say disease, disease, disease. And then we say, I ask them, what is your definition of disease? And then we have a debate about that. And they say, different things. And then some of them are pretty good, some of them not really very good. So I presented them with Dolan's medical dictionary definition of disease. What disease is any deviation from or interruption of the normal structure or function of any part of organ or system, that body that is manifested by a characteristic set of symptoms and signs, and whose etiology, pathology, and prognosis may be known or unknown. So there is a change in anatomy and or physiology of the body and somewhere in the body. It might have has symptoms, and we might know etiology or not. For example, for some of the cancers, which is there's no question that is disease, we don't know etiology, all right? But still we call it cancer, we call it disease. So for alcoholism, we do the same thing here. Like, here I give him a model, a very simple model, of course. So disease model, you have usually an organ or organs, and the organ has a defect, and because of the defect, we have a symptom, right? So this is a simple model for defining something as a disease. You have an organ, defect, and symptoms. Very well-known disease is diabetes, right? There's no question anyone says, diabetes is a disease. We have an organ here, pancreas. We have a defect, it's a cell death. What are the symptoms? High blood sugar. So, okay. So what about the addiction? In addiction, we have an organ, which is called brain, the brain. Defect, yes. It has been shown for cocaine addiction and alcohol addiction and other MRI that change in the structure and function of the brain. We see that, okay? We see change in anatomy and physiology of at least part of the brain, a special part of the brain and so on. And then they have symptoms. What are the symptoms? Craving, loss of control, bad judgment, confusion, low emotion, etc. So it falls, this definition falls in that model that I present in this one. So they have a organ defect symptoms, organ defect symptoms. So by this definition, addiction is a brain disease. We talk about that the whole session. And then what are the blocks and barriers in treatment? Denial. About 80% of drug addicts deny that they have any problem. They say it's your problem, leave me alone, and so on. So we talk about that, and we say denial is like a thick wall between the healthcare individuals and the drug addicts. And so if it's an art and science, if we can remove that wall or that denial, and so the patient comes on this other side. A stigma. Still, we have a stigma in a lot of culture, stigma and shame, and they want people to talk about it. They don't want to say it. They have it or not. And the family pathologies, anonymity, shame, and as I said, and then terminology confusion is abuse versus dependence. We talked about what is abuse, what is dependence by definition. And then conflicting opinion again, because some people believe that addiction is not a disease, it's a willpower problem, and we talked about that. So these are the barriers and blocks for the treatment of drug addicts. Who is at risk? It has been shown that we talk about that because all of the students are adolescents. We talk about if those who initiate alcohol or drug use before age 15 are 5 times more likely than those who wait until after age 21. So the earlier they start, the more risky the situation is. And then adolescents with serious emotional problems are 4 times more likely to experience alcohol and other drugs because they use drugs as a self-medication. All right, and then bring us to if is nature or nurture versus nature and nurture. A lot of people believe that is only genetic. A lot of people say no, it is not genetic. It is how you are nurtured, and some people say no, it's both. So which one is true? Comes to this picture here that addiction is a manifestation of interaction of user, which is individual, and drug and environment. And we talk about that, but we'll talk about each one. Like, when we are talking about individual, we are talking about social status, age, risk-taking, psychiatric state, and genetic aspects. And for environment, peer pressure, family culture, and so on. For drugs, if drug is potent and cheap and that does not have side effect, of course people are going to use it, right? But if drug that is not as potent as you expect and doesn't cause much harm and it's very, very, very expensive and has a side effect, people are going to use it much, 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 much less. As I think the cost, for example, the cost of the drug is a big factor too. So the interaction of these 3 factors is make addiction. For example, if you are living in a society that alcohol is not available, or if you drink, you get lashes, like in Saudi Arabia. So people do not drink alcohol, or they drink it less, or they drink it when they're making it themselves, or something like that. Definitely less. So these policies and the individual characteristics and the genetics and then the drug itself might have an effect on manifestation of addiction. And how to spot a problem drinker. We talked about this because these students are living together in campus and dormitories, and they want, they say, how should I know if my roommate has problem with alcohol? There is a very quick, easy questionnaire, actually designed by Dr. John Ewing from UNC many years ago, with 4 questions. And have you ever felt the need to cut down? And have you ever felt annoyed by someone criticizing you? Have you ever felt guilty about your drinking? Have you ever felt the need for an eye opener? So positive response to even one of these questions should alarm you that this person might have some problems. So this is very easy. It's a 1-minute questionnaire. And then we talked about that. And then we talked about different withdrawals from different drugs. For example, I give a comparison between alcohol withdrawal and heroin withdrawal. Here is alcohol withdrawal. If you are really addicted, if you are really drinking every time, every day, a lot, and then suddenly you stop, you might get hallucination, seizure, and convulsion, and sometimes death. And then with opioid is very, very bad. Dysphoria, insomnia, muscle ache, nausea, vomiting, papillary dilation, and then pile erection, fever. And usually people with that problem, they say they want to die, but they don't die. I mean, from opioid withdrawal, you don't die, but you really, really, really sick. It's like a very, very bad, bad flu. So comparing alcohol and benzodiazepines with opioid, we talked about the withdrawal, that too. And then a hangover. A lot of students talk about this because they experienced it before, or they experienced it at Duke, and then we talk about that. And they talk about their experience. They say, yes, you know, I had a party Saturday night, and Sunday morning I had a lot of problems, and you know, fatigue, weakness, thirst, and so on. So we talk about that one, which is different from a blackout. We talk about that, and then the contributing factors about hangover. We talk about that, you know, the dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, low blood sugar, and all of that. And then so we have to advise them, you know, if you are going to a party and if you are going to drink, make sure that have a lot of water, and some advice about that. And then the students say, you know, we have heard that, you know, drinking in moderation is good, actually. And there is a debate of that, has been around for a long time. And say, we talk about that, drinking in moderation. Yes, we say, yeah, drinking in moderation depends how much you drink, what you drink, at what age you drink. We talk about that. We talk about the so-called the benefits, and then the risk of drinking in moderation that might lead, if you're, for example, has genetic predisposition, that might lead to heavy drinking. If you are going to have a baby, if you're pregnant, in moderation, drinking in moderation might cause some problems. So we talk about drinking in moderation, both in risky behavior or things. And then we have one session talking about Terry's stories. Terry was George McGovern's daughter, who was an alcoholic from at age of 14, 15. She started, and then she had you know, she was the daughter of George McGovern, and then very influential. And then she went to all of these treatment centers, the short-term treatment centers, like 40 days, 20 days, 30 days, like 60 times or something like that, but it didn't work. And eventually she died. So students read this book, and then we have one session to discuss that. And the question that I asked them, you know, if Terry was your sister, what would you do to help her? So we discuss that. That's very important for the students. And these are some quotes from Terry. Says, "My body no longer recognizes any food other than alcohol," when she was talking to her sister. And then after that, we have residents from Trosa coming to the class. And as I said, extremely effective. They talk about their life stories. Some of them had been drinking or using drugs for 20 years, 30 years, living under the bridge as a homeless. And eventually they came to Trosa, stayed there for 2 years, graduated, and now they are doing fine. So we talk about that. Usually we have a woman and a man, different ages, come and they talk about their drug. And students have to write a 2-page reflection on these stories. And then we talk about the genetic aspects. There are 4 lines of evidence to support genetic alcoholism. We talk about the family history, family studies, and adoption studies, twin studies. We present them with the data, and then animal studies, alcohol preferring rats, alcohol non-preferring rats, and fawn hooded rats which have serotonin deficiency. We talk about the role of different neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, and so on, and presented them with some data to support. And we talk about knockout and knock-in animals, and so it's for students. These are very interesting to know, and then they like it very much. And then I presented them with this data, fun-hooded rats with genetic serotonin deficiency. They have shown that they have a preference for alcohol, and also they have depressive tendencies in the forced swim test. We talked about that. And then there's some data, presenting some data, ethanol intake on normal rats or Vista rats versus alcohol-preferring rats and fun-hooded rats. And then when we say, well, these rats have serotonin deficiency, that's why they drink. So what about if we give them some phenphyloramine, which is a serotonergic compound? Their alcohol intake goes down significantly, and their water was off. So they switch from alcohol to water. And then we talked about the common genetics between nicotine and alcohol dependence. So we talk about that also, because most alcoholics smoke, and most nicotine smokers, cigarette smokers, they also alcohol. We talk about that from the genetic point of view. And then we also cover other drugs, stimulants, opioids, marijuana. And then for marijuana, we usually have a session to discuss, especially as a new trend in the country, legalize or not legalize. And then the students have to read a chapter in the book, and also some articles about legalization and not legalization. And then we have a debate on that for this topic. We cover nicotine, hallucinogens, and then ecstasy. And then we talk about the treatment. What are the main factors for successful treatment? We say no signal treatment is appropriate for all individuals. Effective treatment attends to multiple need of the individual, not just like her addiction. Remaining the treatment for an adequate period of time, for a long time, is critical for treatment. We talk about that. We compare shorter treatment versus, for example, TROSA, which is about 2 years. And then treatment does not have to be voluntarily to be effective. And then we talk about boosters in so-called boosters in addiction, that patients have to stay in the treatment for a long period of time. And then counseling and other behavioral therapies are extremely important when it comes to addiction. We talk about that. And then addicted or drug abusing individual with coexisting mental disorder, because most of the addicts drugs have other problems too. So we talk about that, and we say both issues have to be addressed at the same time. So you cannot say just, I'm going to treat your alcoholism and then you come back for depression later. That's not really effective. So we talked about that. And then, summarize it, treatment should accomplish many goals: penetration of denial, as I mentioned, education about the disease concept. It is a disease concept. Is it a brain disease, a treatable brain disease? And the identification of core issues. Why this person is drinking alcohol? Why this person is using cocaine? What was the main reason? What is the core issue? Participation in current therapy session with the family members is extremely important to support family support. And you have to have developing relapse prevention. In their abstinence project, a lot of students relapse. And I said, for these things that, you abstain, you relapse, right? And it was not a real drug addiction, but it's still you relapse. So relapse is a common thing when it comes to addiction and treatment. So we have to be ready. We are not going to tell them that you are going to relapse, but we have to be ready to address if the person has a problem with the relapse. So, and then it takes a long time. It takes a multiple-pronged approach, and it takes a village. And we say, no one is born an addict. No one wants to be an addict. No children says, I want to be an addict when I grow up. But anyone with a brain can become an addict because that's the organ that gets damaged with drugs. Addiction is like the windy, cold, long winter. We're talking about the real addiction. It's the addicts will tell you that it's like that. But if we wait enough, if we're patient enough, we can and will witness spring again. And then we emphasize, this is the motto of my class, more hugs, less drugs. We talk about the support the people with addiction, and then support people even before becoming an addict or drug abuser. So you have more drugs, less drugs. And then thank you for your patience and participation. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Amir. That was wonderful.
Thank
And
you.
thank you for all your teaching, because I'm sure this is just very, very impactful for the students. And so we do have a few minutes for some discussion, and I certainly have questions, but I wanted to open it up. Anyone else have questions they want to start with?
I'm curious, Amir, of how much detail do you go into when the TROSA speakers come about the strategies for treatment that they have there? It's something that my class was asking a lot about today.
Yeah. Well, they talk about it a lot. The residents, when they come to class, they talk about it, about the strategies. They talk about all of that. And also we talk about the TROSA itself, the policy, the strategy. We talk about that. So they get a good idea of what TROSA does. And but of course, it's not like going to TROSA for field trip, unfortunately, but it still is very, very effective. Yeah.
And another question that I had is, do you have what are some really good examples of the things that the students gave up in their abstinence project? What do they usually give up?
Not too many, but usually they say, for example, for TikTok, they say, I was spending like 3 hours a day. Now I'm using like, 1.5 hours. And I had a student who said, she said, rice. I always, every day I have to eat rice. And then she says, now I am eating less. So they, nail biting, for example. I have one student nail biting. And she was doing it in the class. She was doing it like this, and then she said, "No, I'm doing it doing much less."
So they're taking a harm reduction approach.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
Yes.
Yeah, sounds good. So there's a push now to actually avoid the term drug abuse. I just wanted to know about your opinion about that. And I know that, it's counterproductive to have excessive shaming, but I just wondered if there's, what about discouragement? I mean, should we be discouraging of misuse of drugs? I mean, that's the alternative is, why not just have the National Institute for Drug Abuse?
I don't know. I remember George Cook said use drug misuse.
Yeah.
Right. Versus drug abuse.
Right.
I really don't know if it's going to be effective or not. I think I don't know.
It seems like fashions change over time.
Yeah.
So, well, and also, I just wonder when people talk about nature and nurture, or nature or nurture, where does the individual come into this? I mean, because it's kind of like, well, there's my genes, that's driving me, and then there's my experiences and history, and that's driving me. Well, what about me? I mean, the individual's responsibility is not the only thing, but it seems like it should kind of have a part in this whole equation. Yeah.
Well, we talk about that. I said, if you have a gene for blue eyes, you cannot change it, right? But for behavior like this, although you have the genes, you have some control over it. If you know that you are genetically predisposed, then if you are going to, you have to be careful. So that's, you have to be careful, okay? You cannot say, since I have the gene, then it's not my fault. Well, it's not your fault, but it's your fault if you are not careful.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, I think.
Yeah.
And also, what we run in the toxicology field is a concept of risk. And, Nicole was talking about, harm reduction and decreased risks. And, you say, well, you incur risk whenever you cross the street. Well, you should always have your eyes wide open when you're crossing the street. I mean, it's not that you never cross the street. It's just be careful when you do.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So, okay.
So we do our best, and Nicole course is very important too. You are covering some of these aspects, Nicole, right?
Yeah, I was watching as you were going through. Mine ends more on the societal laws and policies thing, but it begins with a lot of the places where you start as well, just shuffling things in a little different order. But yeah, I was just thinking about how hard it is to walk that line between being accepting of people with addiction, but not encouraging our students to think it's okay to take drugs of abuse how do we pick the right language, all those things. And I try to just be as scientifically accurate as possible so that they can then make informed decisions.
Right.
That's where I try to put it all out there.
I never act like a parent. I never tell them, don't drink, don't smoke. I just, at the very beginning, I tell them, I'm going to present you with the scientific data, and you're 18 years old, you make your decision.
Yeah.
And they like that. But they don't want to be told what to do. Yeah.
So I remember talking with Tom Zigaty once, and he had a program. I don't know if you've heard of it. Then the slogan was "Ride the Wave," I think it was, and it was kind of like recognizing that the students want to get a little buzz, so to speak, but keep it at that level. Have a beer an hour or something, but don't have 5 beers an hour, and you don't want to go off the charts too quickly, because a lot of these students don't really have a lot of experience with moderate use, so they just tend to like, oh, this feels good, let's take more.
Well, as you know, peer pressure, especially the first year, is very, very heavy.
So, and then there are a number of students who really don't care to drink. It's to have events where they would feel comfortable not having indulged. So what are your feelings about this kind of societal shift in terms of marijuana, increasing decriminalization and then legalization? Is that a good thing? I mean, I think it's great not to be throwing people in jail for using marijuana, but then like alcohol, I mean, it's legal, but you want to have some constraint on it to keep people from falling into abusive patterns.
I think it doesn't matter what I think it's going to happen. It's going to happen, and I think decriminalization is very important. I'm for it, and I think legalization, I think I'm for it too, because it would be regulated, and then we would know what we are getting, and then. But again, education is extremely important. For example, if the paternal use, as you know, we have some data. A lot of people still don't know the effect of marijuana in fathers, if their father use on an offspring. So that's a very important issue that have to be addressed, and let the public know that.
Good.
So,
okay. Well, thanks so much for giving a really enlightening talk and for your work with the students. And
thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, sure. And then I just want to remind people about in November 10th, TK Lee lecture is going to be going on in the psychiatry department, and the link was put in the chat, and we have I'll send it out of the listserv as well. And then November 17th, Meredith Adicoff is going to be the next speaker in the CABC seminar series, and that'll be together with the Center on Study with Adolescent Risk and Resilience. And please let me know if you'd like to give a talk next semester, or if you have a suggestion for that. And again, thanks, Amir, and thanks everybody, and have a
Thank
great
you.
afternoon.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.